Churches of Christ present Speaking the Truth in Love, a program bringing you life's answers from the Word of God.
Welcome to Speaking the Truth in Love. This broadcast is being brought to you by area congregations of the Church of Christ. There will be a list at the end of this program that will scroll across the screen that will allow you to see the ones not only that support but are willing to be able to answer any questions you might have and more importantly, welcome you into their congregation if you choose to be in that area and find yourself needing a place to worship. They would love to have you. My name is Kenny Townsley. I am privileged to be able to work and to worship at the congregation in Lynn, Arkansas. And as we study today, as we truly do what the title of this program is, as we speak the truth in love, and we are going to look at some things today as considering finally together the responsibility we have as Christians, especially here in the United States, that have the great freedoms that have been afforded us to be a great steward of the speech, the right to speak, the freedom to speak that we have been given. Now we want to be like Christ. We want to wear the name Christian. I believe it is fitting for us to go and to look at words that Christ spoke. Not so much looking at the general directive, as it were, or necessarily the direct teaching, but the attitude with which he taught. Because oftentimes that is what causes us as Christians, as followers of him, the biggest problem. One of the longest discourses that we have is of course found in Matthew chapter 5. It starts there, what we refer to as the Sermon on the Mount, and it very quickly gets to those words in red if your Bible is so equipped, and it is those words that Christ spoke himself. And I want us to notice the first few verses, and as I said, not so much worried about each and every individual detail, but as you know, it's something we refer to as the Beatitudes, but it says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And it goes on and it says, "Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted." Now, you go on and it does it again in verse 5, "Blessed are." Verse 6, "Blessed are." Verse 7, blessed are. And I would recommend that in your own time and in your daily Bible study, you read these closely and you look at these things. But I want you to notice how here Christ, knowing that he is about to start his longest discourse that we have, he starts by pronouncing blessing. I find that very interesting because we truly see to the heart of who Jesus Christ is. You know, think about it if you will. We refer to John 3:16 all the time. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. Here we have the Son speaking. We should understand that he has an attitude of blessing. He has an attitude of pronouncing blessing. And yet, he chooses to start this sermon, he chooses to start this speech by pronouncing blessing. We can truly see to the heart of who Jesus Christ is. Well, if we can see to his heart by pronouncing blessing, shouldn't we as his followers be very quick to do the same? Yes, of course, is the answer. And when you see that, you realize that he keeps on and he goes all the way down through verse 11 saying, blessed are ye. Before he was very specific about a particular group or those types of things, but notice here he changes the idea to blessed are ye, more of a blanket statement. But then something happens in verse 12. The blessed are's stop. But notice here he starts that verse off a little differently. He says, rejoice. Now truly, as you see someone who spent many verses going over blessed are, blessed are, blessed are, and then you read the word rejoice, you understand very closely the idea that Jesus Christ had in his mind and in his heart as he began to speak to this group of people. He wanted them to be blessed. He wanted them to rejoice. But even in that, he very quickly begins to put some responsibility on the hearer. As a matter of fact, if you notice, starting in the very next verse, verse 13, it says, ye are the salt of the earth. But if the salt has lost its savor, wherewith shall it be salted? It is thenceforth good for nothing, but to be cast out and to be trodden under foot of men. And then notice, ye are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hid. Notice how after pronouncing all the blessing and telling us to rejoice, he begins to put the responsibility on us. He begins to give us the idea that without us, his gospel becomes stale, becomes, well, as it were, of no benefit as he talks about the salt. It's humbling to think that he put the responsibility of the gospel of Christ in the hands of mere mortal men, of which myself and others alike that choose to seek and search after walking as Christ, fell in our hands. We must handle those things aright. And here as he talks about the light that is there, the light of the world, we must make sure that we are diligent in making sure that light stays burning. As we see that, we know, and we sing this song with our little children and about to light a candle and put it under a bushel. We wouldn't do that. We put it up on a candlestick. We raise it. And notice how these are words that Jesus Christ spoke to do a couple different things. One, to encourage us, but also to motivate us. And there's two totally different things there. You know, we can be encouraged to do something, but until we rise and do it, the motivation is just not there. And he's trying to do both of those things. And he tells us in verse 16 there, let your light so shine before men. And he tells us these things as he's going through all of that. And he says, I notice verse 18, for verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, till all be fulfilled. And notice there he even says, look, listen to me. I'm saying unto you these things. I'm here to fulfill the law. I'm here to complete that part of the covenant. I'm here to bring in a new one, a better one. But in that better covenant that has the better promises as we are assured in the Bible, you have a responsibility. He very quickly then, in this lesson, he begins to give direct teaching on particular matters. He teaches on murder and anger starting in about verse 21 and covers those things very clearly. He gets down and he teaches on temptation thereafter and divorce and those types of things as he goes through. And chapter after chapter, verse after verse, he does those things. He teaches on particular matters. And when you see the things that are there, you realize that in this teaching, he wants us as his followers to be better. In particular, those that would literally walk at his feet, follow his footsteps, hear him speak daily. Now, with great task comes great responsibility, just as with great freedom comes great responsibility. And I find it interesting that after he teaches quite a bit and he teaches them some things of this life and goes through and begins to teach them how to pray in chapter 6, teaches them about the treasures in heaven as you get on down through the middle of chapter 6, and he then in verse 25 begins to teach about worry. Because oftentimes we unfortunately worry more than we should. And what I mean by worry is we let things bog us down instead of continuing in the things that Jesus said. As a matter of fact, in verse 25, when he begins this teaching, he says, "Therefore I say unto you, take no thought for your life, what ye shall eat, or what ye shall drink, nor yet for your body, what ye shall put on. Is not the life more than meat, and the body than raiment?" And we live in a world of plenty. Those of us who are here, we've talked about the great blessing in this country that we have with the freedom of speech and the right to speak freely. Our stewardship of that, yes, but we're blessed because there's just plenty here. We should be thankful. We should be grateful. We should use those resources in the furthering of God's kingdom, yes, but when it all boils down to it, those things are passing. Those things are fleeting, as it were. We know that there is a point coming in this life where everything that we own, if time goes on, will be someone else's. Jesus Christ says, don't take any thought for those things. He understands that, yes, the physical resources of this life are things that we must do. As a matter of fact, he had just got finished in chapter 6. He taught on giving and realized that there are things and treasures on this earth, but we're to place greater emphasis on the treasures in heaven, as he spoke just before this. And as I see these things going down through the entirety of these passages, you can still clearly see the love that Jesus Christ had for those that were in audience. And when I say in audience, yes, it's those that are in audience at this particular time. But here we are some 2,000 years removed from that event, and notice what is happening. We're reading these scriptures today. We're studying these things, learning and understanding how we can be better, in particular with the idea of the words that we use and the spirit with which we use them. The way that we speak as much as what we speak. Thinking about this, he goes on and he talks about, there again, a lot of things. But he begins to wind up, I guess would be the best way to put it. You've probably all sat in services where it's just kind of, you can tell that the end of the sermon is coming. There's certain words being used, there's certain mannerisms, as it were, and maybe wrapping it up into one tiny package so it's easier to remember, and he begins to do that. And in those things, he uses some difficult words, maybe would be the best way to put it. You get down to chapter 7, and you see there in verse 13, it says, "Enter ye in at the strait gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leadeth to destruction, and many there be which go in thereat. Because strait is the gate, and narrow is the way which leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it." Now, that's a hard teaching. Notice he didn't stutter, he didn't stammer, he didn't say, well, you know, I hope this don't hurt anybody's feelings. And even in this, the teaching that is put forth here, he knew that the things that he had already spoken up to this point, there would only be a few listened to. That's something that is humbling, but it also sometimes causes us to stop. Because we can be very good stewards of the words that we speak. We can be very good stewards of the right that we've been given to speak freely. We can not be doing those things of profanity and vanity and lying and gossip and those things. We can be doing those things of teaching and admonishing one another and preaching the gospel and going into all the country and preaching the gospel. And we can do all of those things. But we must do as Jesus Christ did here in speaking these words and realize that there'll be a few that find it. Not everybody will be open to the Word of God that is here before him. I think of Jesus Christ. He's the master teacher, and yet he was rejected by his own people. The Bible assures us that we're not to grow weary in well-doing, even though sometimes when we see things like this, it is at least possible. It is at least something that crosses our mind. You know, we tend to be, and sometimes pretend to be, tough. We tend to be thick-skinned. We tend to be motivated. But deep down, there is that sense of it will not be enough. But we must keep on. We must use the words. We must take the responsibility that has been given, because notice, he tells these things, he says these things about the wide gate and the strait gate, and he tells them few there be that find it. But notice he begins with a warning in the next verse. It says, "Beware of false prophets." There are others out there who are trying to lead people astray just as you are trying to lead them to right. They have the same resources, they have the same rights, they have the same type of teaching. Actually, they have a greater sense of teaching. And what I mean by that is, it seems like they have more of the media. They have more of the outlets. They have more of the internet. They have more of whatever source you would want to use in modern day times. And oftentimes it seems like they have more as far as number. Well, that's exactly what the Bible just said. The wide gate, the broad way, many there be that find it. So we must stay extra diligent. We must listen to the words of Christ. We must go back and see where he started this whole lesson at, understanding that we're blessed. And all those specific groups of individuals that he talks about being blessed, we must make sure that we remember that as we carry through these things. When you go on and you find the ending of this lesson, I've always found it so very interesting that he ends this particular discourse, he ends this particular sermon, as we call it, with a, well, how do we often teach it? We teach it with a children's song. If you get to verse 24, notice it says, "Therefore whosoever heareth these sayings of mine. Now notice, he's spoken the words, we've been hearers. But notice, there's more to it than just doing the hearing. And doeth them, I will liken him unto a wise man which built his house upon a rock. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the wind blew, and beat upon that house, and it fell not, for it was founded upon a rock. Notice, he starts that off by saying, therefore whosoever heareth. But then we must do. I have a great responsibility, just as you do also. I do have to hear the words of God. I have to go and search the Scriptures. We know that we're to study that to show thyself approved. We know we're to rightly divide the word of truth. We notice in that even it says a workman that needs not to be ashamed. That just hearing His word is not enough. That we must then move on into other accounts of this particular deal of the building on the rock. Talks about how they digged down to reach that rock and reach the foundation that was solid so they could build that house on. We do that in the physical world. We should also do it in the spiritual world. Of course, naturally, he gives the opposite side of that. The opposite of the one who did the things that he said, who went to the rock and laid the foundation and built his house there, and it stood firm. It says, and every one that heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them not shall be likened unto a foolish man, which built his house upon the sand. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew, and beat upon the house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. Now, these sayings of Jesus, and we've just glossed through in the time that we've had the sermon that we call the Sermon on the Mount. But I want you to notice, going back to the very beginning, he began by saying, blessed are. Blessed are. Blessed are. For many verses he says this, and then he says rejoice. Then he lays the responsibility squarely at our feet. To obey the teachings that he gives, to go into a world with these sayings, not just hearing them but doing them. Making sure that we apply first to our home, to our house, to our soul, to our body, leading ourselves toward the eternal home of heaven. Making sure that we're founded on the rock so that when the rains come, and as we mentioned earlier, we know that there are times of weakness in this life that we lead. That's when the winds are blowing. The rains are descending. It's when we're being beat upon. If we have the right foundation, if we have the sayings of Jesus as our foundation, we can stand. Now, if we don't, we're likened unto a foolish man. Nobody. I've never known anyone who thought it a compliment to be called foolish. It's just not the way life works. We like to be considered wise, and we like to be considered smart and having knowledge and those types of things. My Bible and yours, at the very end of Jesus Christ speaking here in Matthew, says that if we don't do the things, not just hear them, if we don't do the things, if we don't mimic His teaching, if we don't say the same things, if we don't follow along the narrow path, the straight gate, we're foolish. We choose to be foolish. And there is a fall that is imminent. There is a fall that is great. We must understand that when Jesus Christ spoke, he spoke in a way no other man has ever spoke. He spoke with a kindness and gentleness that I can strive to be the same as, but will never reach that level of mastery. I'll never have the depth of knowledge that he had. But it does not diminish my responsibility in knowing the sayings of Jesus, and we've only looked at a few. Jesus Christ literally spoke until his death. You can go and you can see while he was hanging on the cross, he spoke words from the cross that hold great teaching for us today. And in that, we know that the master teacher, Jesus the Christ, is who we want to wear the name of, yes. Wearing the name is more than just attending his services. It is knowing not only his words, knowing his will, knowing his attitude, knowing the spirit with which those words were delivered. But most importantly, not just knowing, not just hearing those things, but having the do-it attitude, the can-do attitude, the digging deep to the foundation, building our house upon the rock, because he knows if our house is strengthened, if we stay strong and firm in his teaching, his church will be encouraged, his church will grow, and his church will flourish upon this earth, in this country, and across this world. We've been blessed with the right to speak. Make sure and do so wisely. Make sure and do so as Jesus Christ has given us directive with the Spirit that he has. We understand that we are truly blessed because Jesus Christ. Thank you for your time this day. I do appreciate it.
If you have a Bible question, would like to receive a free Bible correspondence course, would like a copy of 2 free books, Why I'm a Member of the Church of Christ, and Basic Bible Lessons, please contact the Nettleton Church of Christ. Speaking the Truth in Love can be viewed online. Speaking the Truth in Love is brought to you by these area churches of Christ.
Jesus saves, Jesus saves.